Welcome back to another journey into the heart of chess mastery. Today, we are stepping into a time machine to revisit one of the most dominant periods in the history of the game. The year is 1964. The place is Boston, Massachusetts. And the man commanding the white pieces is none other than the American legend, Robert James Fischer. His opponent in this game is Kermit Pransky, a brave amateur who finds himself sitting across from a future world champion. Fischer begins the game with his signature move, pawn to e4. This was his beloved opening, the move he famously called best by test. It immediately stakes a claim in the center and opens lines for his queen and light-squared bishop. Pransky replies with pawn to e6. This is the French defense. It is a solid, reputationally tough nut to crack. By playing the pawn to e6, Black prepares to challenge the center with the d-pawn on the next move, but he accepts a slightly cramped position in exchange for solidity. Fischer responds classically, pushing his pawn to d4. Now both players have established a central presence. Pransky follows up with pawn to d5, striking directly at Fischer's e-pawn. The tension is immediate. White has to make a choice here: trade, advance, or defend. Fischer chooses the most principled and ambitious path. He plays his knight to c3. This is the classical variation. He defends the e-pawn while developing a piece. He invites Black to pin the knight, which leads to sharp, double-edged struggles. And Pransky accepts the challenge. He plays bishop to b4. This is the Winawer Variation. It is one of the most complex battlegrounds in chess. By pinning the knight on c3, Black threatens the e4 pawn again and creates a permanent imbalance in the pawn structure. Fischer, never one to back down, pushes his pawn to e5. This closes the center. It gains space and drives a wedge into the heart of the Black position. This pawn on e5 is a thorn in Black's side. It takes away the f6 square from Black's knight and points like a dagger toward the king side. Pransky must react quickly to this cramping influence. He strikes back with pawn to c5. This is the thematic counterpunch in the French defense. Black attacks the base of White's pawn chain at d4. If the d4 pawn falls, the e5 pawn becomes weak. Fischer ignores the threat to his d-pawn for the moment and plays pawn to a3. In the Winawer, retreating is rarely a good option, so Pransky captures. Bishop takes knight on c3, checking the king. Fischer recaptures with his b-pawn. Pawn takes bishop. Let's pause and look at the board. The transformation is significant. Fischer now has what we call doubled pawns on the c-file. Strategically, this is a weakness in the endgame. However, in return, Fischer has strengthened his center. That pawn on d4 is now reinforced by the c3 pawn, and he has opened the b-file for his rook. Most importantly, he possesses the bishop pair, the two long-range bishops which can slice through an open position. Pransky has chosen a strategy of structure over mobility. Pransky continues his development with knight to e7. In the French defense, the knight can't go to f6 because of that white pawn on e5, so it comes to e7, often heading to f5 or g6 to pressure white. Now, Fischer makes a move that signals his aggressive intent. He plays pawn to h4. This is a very sharp, modern idea. Usually you develop your pieces, knights, and bishops before moving edge pawns. But Fischer understands the specific geometry of this position. He wants to use the h-pawn as a battering ram to soften up the Black king side. Pransky, perhaps underestimating the danger or simply following standard principles, decides to get his king to safety. He castles kingside. On the surface, this looks like the right thing to do. Get the king behind a wall of pawns, connect the rooks. But in this specific position, with Fischer's h-pawn already marching and the center locked, castling into the short side is like walking into a storm. Fischer develops his knight to f3. He is bringing his pieces toward the sector where the war will be fought. Pransky now decides to resolve the tension in the center. He plays pawn takes pawn on d4. Fischer recaptures with the c-pawn, pawn takes d4. The center is now solidified. Fischer has a strong pawn mass in the middle of the board, and his pieces are ready to spring out. Pransky brings his queen out, queen to c7. This is a multi-purpose move. It attacks the c3 pawn, it eyes the e5 pawn, and it clears the back rank. It looks active. But notice the board. White's pieces are pointed at the king. Black's pieces are looking at pawns. Now, Fischer plays a crucial developing move. Bishop to d3. Place this bishop on the board in your mind. It sits on d3, looking along a surprisingly open diagonal straight at the h7 pawn, right in front of the black king. This setup, the bishop on d3, the knight on f3, and the pawn on e5 is the classic recipe for a tactical combination known as the Greek gift. The ingredients are all there, simmering. Pransky develops his knight to c6. He is putting pressure on the d4 pawn, playing logical, standard chess. But standard is not enough to survive against Fischer. Pransky has missed the tactical storm clouds gathering over his head. He assumes his position is solid because he has no obvious weaknesses. But he has one fatal flaw. His king is the target, and his defenders are too far away. The trap is set. Fischer springs it. Bishop takes h7, check. This is the Greek gift sacrifice. Fischer gives up a full bishop simply to destroy the pawn cover around the black king. It is a shock to the system. Pransky has to calculate immediately. If he moves the king to h.8 to avoid taking the bishop, he is simply down a pawn with a shattered position. So, he accepts the challenge. King takes bishop on h7. Now the king is exposed, the shield is gone. Fischer brings in the cavalry. Knight to g5, check. This is the follow-up. The knight leaps into the attack supported by the e4 bishop, if it were there, or simply the geometry of the board. Pransky is in deep trouble. He has to decide where to move his king. If he goes back to g8, the queen flies out to h5, threatening checkmate on h7 or h8, and there is almost no defense. Pransky decides to brave the storm. He plays king to g6. This is a spirited try. He brings his king forward, hoping to hide behind his own pawns or perhaps trade pieces to survive. But a king on g6 in the middle game is a tragedy waiting to happen. Fischer now needs to bring his queen into the attack, but instead of a brute force queen move immediately, he plays a move of subtle brilliance, pawn to a4. You might ask, why move the a-pawn on the other side of the board? This is a clearance move. Fischer might be preparing to bring his dark-squared bishop to a3 to cut off the king's retreat, or perhaps he is just waiting, improving his position, while black is paralyzed. It shows total control. He is in no rush because the black king has nowhere to go. It's a cat playing with a mouse. Pransky tries to bring a defender back. He plays knight takes e5. He captures the central pawn, hoping to clear space or perhaps distract Fischer. He is trying to return material to save his life. But it is too late. The material count does not matter anymore. Only the king matters. Fischer drives the attack forward. Pawn to h5, check. The noose tightens. The king is pushed further toward the edge of the cliff. Pransky's king has to move. He plays king to f5. Just look at that king. He started on e8, castled to g8, moved to h7, then g6, and now he is on f5. He is almost in the center of the board, surrounded by enemy pieces. It is a sad sight for the monarch. Fischer is merciless. He plays pawn to g4, check. Every move is a punch. Fischer is using his pawns to strip away every last square available to the black king. The king is being hunted down like a wild animal. Pransky has only one legal move left. He must play king to f6. He is now standing on the very square where his knight usually belongs. And now, the final blow. Fischer looks at the board, sees the geometry, and delivers the coup de grace. Knight to h7, checkmate. Take a moment to appreciate the beauty of this final picture. The white knight on h7 delivers the fatal check. The black king on f6 is boxed in. He cannot go to e7 or g6 because of his own pieces. He cannot go to e5 or g5 because of white's pawns and pieces. He is trapped in a cage of his own making, executed by a single knight and a swarm of pawns. If you enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more legendary games brought to life, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into chess history.